Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to wrap up period 4 in our study about the events that were in the time period from 1800 to 1848. So today we're going to start talking about westward expansion. I want to share with you this very famous painting. This is basically the painting that you always associate with going west. You have Lady Liberty in the middle. She's carrying what looks to be a Bible and string around her arm that is strung between these poles, so you can say that it was probably telegraph wire. You have all this technology that's coming behind her as she is leading this towards the west. And so this is the ultimate picture of what they thought American progress was back in the day. Going west was a very popular thing, by the time we get to, the 1840s. Fur trappers, though, had been out there for centuries by this time, and they become known as mountain men. These were the guys who did most of the forging of the trails across the Rocky Mountains. I don't know if any of you have got a chance to see the Rocky Mountains, but they're very high and very rugged type of mountains, different from the Appalachians over on the east side of the country. Because they are newer and less eroded. And so they're very high and jagged. And so these mountain men being able to find passages through these mountains over to the west coast was very valuable. Also, these mountain men would periodically get together and have these big parties called rendezvous, and it was things like who could climb the tree the fastest, who could stay on the log rolling it in the water the longest, axe throwing, all those manly mountain men things that they like to do, and they were called rendezvous. Well, the places where they held these rendezvous later on will become some of our very first national parks, and so that was a key thing about going west. Also, during this time period, you have got a lot of immigration coming into the country. This is, America's had like 3 major waves of immigration in our history. This is what, maybe a mini wave, you might want to call it that. It was mostly Irish and Germans. I'll show you this graph here. From Ireland, 44% of the immigrants are from Ireland, and that is because of the potato famine, also known as the blight. It was a disease that had infested the potato crop, which was their only cash crop. And because Great Britain controlled the country, so they controlled Ireland, instead of taking what crop survived to feed the Irish people, they just sold it. And so the Irish people were dying in droves. And so a lot of them will be packed up on ships and just sent over to the New World. And so that's why you're going to have a lot of Irish coming in. This is going to cause some issues over here. The Irish are Roman Catholic, and they're coming in a country that's predominantly Protestant. Being Catholic, they are also heavy drinkers. That's going to go against the teetotaling group in the Protestants. They don't have very many items with them. They're coming over with very few belongings, a lot of them just with the clothes off their back. And so they're not going to be looked at well by the people that were already here. The people that were really against them are going to be called nativists. I'll go into that here in a little bit. But they were hated by native-born Americans. But they will also not like different groups. They won't like blacks because that is competition for jobs. And so, both groups suffered under slavery. A lot of people don't know that the Irish had been enslaved even over here. And so, but the biggest group that the Irish are going to hate are going to be the British, and they're going to hate the British forever. In fact, there's still quite a bit of animosity between the two countries. It's much better now than it was, but still you have this tension between Ireland and Great Britain. Another group that's coming over are the Germans. Now, the Germans are coming over for a different reason. They're coming over because there's a lot of turmoil going on over in their country. This is the beginnings of when Bismarck is going to start causing conflict between neighboring kingdoms, trying to consolidate Germany into one solid country. And so there's a lot of infighting going on. And so a lot of these Germans are trying to escape all the conflict back in Germany. So they're going to come over with all their possessions. because they're coming over voluntarily. They tend to be better educated. Because they come from an environment that doesn't use slavery, they're going to hate slavery. They're going to tend to move further inland as they come across. So if you've ever heard of the Pennsylvania Dutch, that they're not talking about people from Holland, because it originally was the Pennsylvania Deutsch, which is the proper way to say German or Germany in German. So it's called Deutschland. And so these are the two biggest groups coming over at this time. Now, like I said a minute ago, there is a group of people already in this country. These are people that have been born in America. They're not the original Native Americans, but they're going to be called nativist. And that's, these are native-born Americans. They came, their parents or grandparents were the ones that came over, and they were born in this country. And so they're going to believe that they have got more rights and privileges than these new immigrants coming in, an issue that we still have problems with even today. So make sure you know, nativists are against immigration. They're going to form a political party called the Know Nothing Party, or the American Party. The reason they get nicknamed the Know Nothing Parties is whenever you tried to ask them what their political stance was, what their party platform was, they would say, "Oh, I know nothing." So here is a depiction of how the nativist would go after people of that were new to the country. You'd have riots in certain areas. They would be very discriminatory against them as far as where they could find jobs. A lot of the Irish are going to take the least preferred jobs, and you're going to find this interesting. Back in the day, people, high society people felt like police officers were the very dregs of society because they were getting too close to that criminal element, even more so than the way people think about police today. And so nobody wanted to be a police officer. When these Irish come in, they're going to pick up those police officer jobs. That's one of the reasons why we call police officers cops, because the Gaelic for police is CAEP, cop, and that's where they get that name. And so they're going to pick up those kinds of jobs. Well, as they become more and more involved in police work, it's going to give them a power base, because now they enforce the laws. And so this is where the Irish are going to get their foot in the door as far as building a power base, especially in places like Boston and New York City. It's also one of the reasons why anytime there is a funeral for a police officer, you hear bagpipes playing. It all comes from this early group of Irish that become police officers. They're going to create parochial schools for their children. Now, these are religious schools. They start off being Catholic schools. In fact, when I was growing up, the only parochial schools that I knew of were, like St. Elizabeth's over in Oak Cliff and St. Mark's over in North Dallas. And these were all of the parochial schools that existed in, the Dallas area. Well, they create them back in this time period so that their children won't lose a cultural base. They want them to learn English. They want them to become American, but they also don't want them to lose their religious values or the idea of where they came from. They're also going to be the ones that are going to pick up the wage labor jobs. And this is going to be important as we start getting into the events leading up to the Civil War. In the North, you're going to find lots of immigrants coming in, and they're going to stay in the North because that's where the wage labor jobs are. They can't find jobs in the South because the South is a slave labor base, and so there aren't very many wage labor jobs to be had, and so that's why most of your immigration is going to stay in the North, and that's why the North is going to progressively have more and more population as they expand. But as a wage labor group, it's also going to cause a lot of overcrowding. And so as we get even to after the Civil War, you're going to have these people working for very long hours, very tedious jobs for very little money, because the employers have an endless supply of labor. If you didn't like the way you were being treated, then you could, take yourself on down the road, because they got a whole line out here of people, just waiting to take your job. Now, another group talking about people coming in and people going west, before I move on to other things, I want to talk about the Mormons. The Mormons were a religious group. A lot of people that they were associated with or lived around felt like they were a cult. There's a man named Joseph Smith who finds the golden tablets and creates the Book of Mormon. And back in this time period, they don't go along with this today, but back in this time period, they believed in polygamy, which is having more than one wife. And so they were centered up in Nauvoo, Illinois. The people that lived in that town that were not Mormon didn't like them very much, were very suspicious of them. And one day, Joseph Smith is going to be assassinated. And so there's going to be a guy that's going to step up and lead them to Utah, and that's going to be a guy named Brigham Young. So if you've ever heard of BYU or Brigham Young University, that's who that is. And so they're going to migrate over to Utah and settle there around Salt Lake City and Provo, and that area over there. But they're the ones that are going to establish what becomes known as the Mormon Trail, which is one of the highways, dirt highways as it was, but a highway of going west, and later on other pioneers will follow along that same road. Now, politically during this time period, this is, in the 1840 election, you had the election of William Harrison as president, and his running mate was John Tyler. And if you recall what I said earlier, William Henry Harrison is going to be very stubborn and insist on taking the oath of office without wearing a hat. And it was March in Washington, D.C., cold, sleety rain. He's going to catch pneumonia, and 30 days later, he's going to die. And so that's going to bring this guy right here, John Tyler, in as president. Now, John Tyler had been elected as vice president on the Whig ticket, but he was a Democrat in Whig clothing. And so once he becomes president, he is going to do things that the Whigs are going to be very unhappy about, and they're going to disown him and kick him out of the party. He is going to veto the bank recharter, so that's very much like the Andrew Jackson. He is going to negotiate the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, which is going to kind of finish out the top part of the United States. If you have printed off the notes or looked at the notes, you'll see that on one of the back pages there is a map that shows the expansion of the United States. In fact, here, let me hold my copy of it up for you. It's this map right here, and this area way up here at the top, right here at the top of Wisconsin, and over here at the very top of Maine, is what the Webster-Ashburton Treaty is. And so he's going to negotiate that. He supports the Oregon Treaty that's going to give us Oregon all the way up to the 5440 parallel, which is higher than what we got. And during that gap between when he loses the 1844 election and James K. Polk takes over is when Texas is going to become the next state in the Union. So this guy right here in 1844 becomes president, James K. Polk. He is known as Young Hickory because he also is from Tennessee. And he's a Democrat, so they're associating him with Andrew Jackson. In fact, if you go to the Capitol building in Nashville, you'll find on one side of the Capitol building there's a statue to Andrew Jackson. On the other side is the tomb, basically, of James K. Polk and his wife. They're buried on the Capitol grounds. And so but him more than any other guy during this time, you want to associate him with Manifest Destiny. He wanted to go west. He wanted California more than he could think. He just desperately wanted California. And so he is going to move in that direction to gain everything he can to acquire California. Now, Manifest Destiny is that belief that we as Americans have this God-given destiny to go west and spread democracy and education and Christianity all the way from sea to shining sea. And so that's what this motivation is with Manifest Destiny. Now, when he becomes president, he's got 4 main goals. He wants to lower the tariff, and he'll do that with the Walker tariff. He wants to restore the independent treasury that's going to separate the government's money from the public's money, and that's going to be done with the Independent Treasury Bill of 1845. he wants to also acquire California, like I said a minute ago. And then he is a proponent of the 5440. In fact, his campaign slogan had been 5440 or fight. So if we didn't get the treaty at the 5440 parallel, then we were going to go to war with Great Britain over this. Well, they're going to settle that one under treaty, and it's going to be settled at the 49th parallel, which is that top part of where the United States is today. That's going to give Great Britain Vancouver, but that's going to give us Puget Sound. Now, if you've ever been to Washington State, or looked at the map, you'll know that over there by Seattle, there's this huge big body of water right there between Seattle and that little section over there where Mount Olympia is. And that's called Puget Sound. It's a deep water port. It's very important that we have that because that allows shipping and big ships to be able to come in and go out. And that's going to be our first one over on the West Coast. Today, it has got a substantial naval base there that is where a lot of our submarines are because the submarines can get down that deep. But if you ever have a chance and you're up in that area, get up early, and now do this in the summertime where it's not quite so cold. But get up early one morning and take the ferry across Puget Sound. It is so beautiful and peaceful, and the birds fly over the water, and you can hear the trees rustling and the winds blowing. It's just one of the most wonderful things I think I've ever done is to go across Puget Sound in a ferry early in the morning. I think I went across, it was like 7 o'clock in the morning. It was so beautiful. Now, during James K. Polk's time period is when we're going to have the Mexican War. Now, there are several wars that we have with Mexico. This one is really known as the Mexican-American War. And this is going to be a 2-year war, and it started over about 150 miles in Texas. So this little section right here between Corpus Christi and the Rio Grande is what this is going to get kicked off over. America is saying that the Rio Grande is the southern border of the United States, and Mexico's come back, oh no, it's not either. It is, it's the Nueces River that comes out of Corpus Christi. So that's what kind of kicks that off. Now, as I've tried to tell you in the past, we're not going to get too deep into military type of issues and stuff. I'm going to give you the highlights of the war. This class is not a military history class. So some of the important things about the Mexican-American War, the generals that fought in it. So you have Zachary Taylor, who will later become a president, and you have Winfield Scott, who will later become the first northern general of the Civil War, of the Northern Army. It is not a very long war, and we're going to gain a whole lot of stuff out of it. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is what settles this war, and with this treaty, America gets everything from right here all the way over here to the West Coast. So all this area here, it's ceded. If you look at the map, it says ceded by Mexico. That means they gave it over, and we gave them some money for it. I believe we paid them, I can't remember, it was $15 million or $20 million for that whole section right there. But what this is going to do is this is going to open up that can of worms over slavery again, because now you have all this new territory, and the debate over whether it's going to be slave or free is going to go back and forth and back and forth. The other thing that I skipped over about the generals that were here, the other thing that this war is going to do is it's going to train military officers that will later become generals in the Civil War. So people like Ulysses S. Grant, Stonewall Jackson, Sherman, Robert E. Lee are all going to get their training on commanding men in war during the Mexican-American War. That's going to be influential when we get into the Civil War later on. Now, as this issue over the new territory starts to heat up, there is lots of different aspects to it. In this next slide here, one of the big things and one of the big reasons why Polk wanted California is they had started to discover gold out there. You can see all the different sections here. The San Francisco 49ers are called that because in 1849 is when they find the Comstock lode that is right here around Sacramento and San Francisco. And so there was a lot of mineral wealth to be had by gaining California. But you've got this issue going back and forth over, well, are we going to be slave? Are we going to be free? How are we going to do all this? And so there's a guy named David Wilmot who is going to propose that all the territory that we gained from the Mexican-American War be slave-free. But of course, it's not going to pass Congress. Half of Congress is slave states, and the other half of Congress is not. So they're never going to have enough votes to be able to get David Wilmot's Wilmot Proviso to pass. So they're going to decide with the 1850 Compromise to bring California in as a free state and to let all the other territory, the Utah territory, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, they're all going to get to choose by using popular sovereignty whether or not they're going to be a slave territory or a free territory. So that means that the people were going to get to vote. Okay, and so this is going to be an issue for the next 12 years over what we're going to do with all this free territory. Now, when we get into period 5, I'll go more in depth into the Compromise of 1850 and all the rest of that entailed. So here is a expansion map. This is a better colored map of the one that I included in your notes, because in your notes I think it's black and white. But you can see all the different area that we acquire and when we acquire it. Now, the other thing that's going to happen with the Compromise of 1850 is this is when we're going to get this little section right here marked off as the boundary of Texas, and all this is going to get put over to these territories. And then this Gadsden Purchase will come with one of the next presidents. So when I talk about the Gadsden Purchase in a minute, I'm talking about this little section right here. So let's talk about these 4 presidents. Now, these are known, and these are not all of them, but these are known as the no-name presidents. The reason they're called this is because not a whole lot happened while they were president. And so we have a tendency to forget who they are. And so that's why they get this name. So the first one is Zachary Taylor. Now, I mentioned him a second ago. He was one of the generals of the Mexican-American War. He will be elected in 1848. He is a Whig. He is against the Compromise of 1850, but he will not live very long after he gets elected. He is, I believe he was eating cherries and cream, and I don't know if it was he swallowed too many cherry pits, but it causes a blockage, an intestinal blockage, and he's going to die. And so this guy right here, Millard Fillmore, is going to take over, and he's just going to finish out Zachary Taylor's term, but it was about 3 years that was left that he's going to finish out as president. Now, he is a Whig as well. He is for the Compromise of 1850, and during his time in office is what's known as the Second Era of Good Feelings, and that's because there wasn't a lot of political bickering going on. It was things that kind of quieted down a little bit again, and so he didn't have a lot of infighting going on that he had to deal with while he was in office. And then the next president is this guy here, Franklin Pierce. He is elected in 1852. He is a Democrat. He was an expansionist, much like Polk, and it's under his administration that we're going to get the Gadsden Purchase that I was pointing out a minute ago that's going to finish out the bottom part of what is now the United States. And he is for the Compromise of 1850. And then this guy right here is James Buchanan. Now, he has the distinction of being the only bachelor president that we've ever had, but of course, there's a lot of debate over, his lifestyle choices and stuff, and people kind of skip over the more important thing that happens while he's president, and that is he doesn't do anything. That he's president during the Dred Scott case. He's president during the Kansas-Nebraska issue, and he kind of sits back and really doesn't do a whole lot to settle down the sectional differences that are really starting to come to a boil between the North and the South and over the issue of slavery and stuff and states' rights. And so these are the last few presidents before we get into the presidents, Lincoln and the Civil War and stuff like that. So the last thing in your notes is this prompt. To what extent did reforms of the Jacksonian era, 1824 to 1848, amount to a victory for common Americans? And so you want to go back and you want to look at some of the different reforms. So we're talking about reforms like education reform or the temperance movement, the women's rights movement, the impact of the Second Great Awakening, abolitionism, okay? So all those kinds of reforms. And what you want to do is you want to list the reforms, find 4 of them so that you got, a nice little group there. Pick 4 reforms, describe them in the middle box, and then on the last part of the last column, then talk about how it was a victory or not a victory for common Americans. And if you'll do these prompts that are in your notes, when they show up on a test or they show up on a quiz or something like that, then you're better prepared to be able to answer them. As you're going through them though, and you have questions on how to answer it, which ones were reforms, I mean, you could say, you can even go back to Jackson and you could talk about the bank and how, what Jackson did with the bank. It was a reform. Did it really help common Americans? I mean, he does collapse the second bank in the United States. You could even talk about the tariff issue. But you have to remember that you have to look at what was a reform and what was not. A reform is something that is supposed to change something for the better. Whether it does or not, that's the last question. But the intent is that it's going to change something for the better. So, for instance, the Indian Removal Act, that is not a reform. I mean, they marched 100,000 Native Americans and killed a bunch of them on the way. The spoil system, that is not a reform. Now, later on, when they come out with the Pendleton Act after the Civil War, that's going to reform the spoil system. But the spoil system itself is not a reform. So you're looking at things that are changes that are trying to be made for the better. So pick out 4 of them, describe what they are, and then discuss whether or not they were a victory. And that should help you in getting prepared for a quiz or the test or what have you. And that's going to wrap up period 4. Next time we get together, we're going to jump off into all the different things leading up to the Civil War, and then we're going to go to war with each other. In fact, I usually call it the war between the states because there wasn't anything civil about it. But we're going to talk about the events leading up to and into the Civil War. So until then, we'll talk to you later. Bye.